Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sesotris, and this week I wanted to do a review on a book that I just finished reading that it took me a little bit before I figured out sort of what I felt about it. I finished the book and it was a good reading experience, but it dealt with really high concept things, and I got to the end and I didn't really know how I felt about it. So I slept on it, woke up the next morning, and then thought, yep, I did like that. The book I'm talking about is In Ascension by Martin MacInnes. So this one is marketed as sort of literary sci-fi. It basically tells the story of a discovery of something that may be extraterrestrial in origin, kind of at the bottom of the sea. And the main character is very much not in the loop for a lot of this. She's very much kind of a tangential character in all this, sort of viewing things from the fringes. And then over time starts to uncover what is actually going on. And through the course of the book, you also get insight into her character, because there's kind of this tension in her life between her job and taking care of her mother, and the complicated relationship she has with her parents and her siblings. And so it's more about her internal journey than it is about the big sci-fi stuff going on. And at first I wasn't really sure if I liked that, but when you get to the end, you're like, you know what? It works. It works. This is very much a personal story, and it's really gripping. It is very slow burn. So if you're expecting, big sci-fi revelations, those don't really happen until like right at the very, very end. So you do have to be patient, but I do think the book is ultimately valuable as a result. So the way that I rate books is I have a number of criteria, and the first criterion is, did the characters feel like real people? And that's an interesting question, because the main character in this one feels a little aloof. She's very much she's someone who has sort of pulled herself away from emotion because of trauma in her past. And so she's very focused and driven. She sort of loses herself in her work. And in that regards, I think she's very relatable. Some people may not like the main character because this is a very traumatized character, and there's things in her past that you kind of learn about over time that sort of make it difficult for her to relate to other people in a really meaningful way. Like she's polite and has friendships and stuff, but there's always kind of a distance there. And she doesn't really ever quite fit in. And so through this whole journey, she reacts to kind of not being in the loop, not knowing what's going on. There's some kind of mystery going on, maybe alien in origin, and over time she kind of learns how she fits into everything. And it is very satisfying ultimately, but the character definitely goes through a bit of a journey in that regards. So I do think the characters feel like real people, but there is kind of a coldness and an aloofness in the way that the main character sees other people. So for the first maybe half of the book, people seem sort of confusing or distant or unreadable, and their dialogue almost feels a bit stilted because the main character doesn't really know how to connect with a lot of them. But over time, she sort of not learns how to deal with people, but learns kind of, where she fits into the grand scheme of things in this whole project. And we do see her forming sort of meaningful relationships. And there's a great section near the end where we get to see sort of her impact on other people and how they see her. And I really, really appreciated this character's journey. So yes, the character definitely feels like a real person, but just be aware going into it that this character is sort of cut off from people, and it's about connecting with other people as sort of her character arc. Next up, the next criterion is, did the writing style draw you in? Absolutely. This is such a gorgeously written book. It's very elegant. It's very, I don't know, epic and sweeping. It is a very personal story of kind of one person, but you do get a sense that sort of the internal cosmology of the main character's brain is as complex and expansive and beautiful as sort of the cosmos itself. And there's lots of this sort of metaphors of kind of internal and external and the way people relate to one another, and it's just gorgeous. If I had to relate this to another book, I know a lot of people have said this reminds them of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it reminds me more of the movie than the book, but the book that it really reminded me of was Contact by Carl Sagan, which is definitely one of my favorite sci-fi books ever. That one, again, it's all about sort of the internal journey of the main character, and it's not so much about, you know, explosive battles and you know, paradigm shifts on Earth. It's about the character's journey towards understanding something that's important to her. And so in this sense, it definitely feels like that. And it has that same kind of elegant simplicity. It's very kind of spare at times, very opulent at other times. It definitely feels big and sweeping and epic. A movie that it sort of reminds me of is like Tree of Life, where it's sort of, you know, the microscopic and the macroscopic played off one another. So this is, you know, the writing style and the prose is definitely one of my favorite things about this book. It really feels like you experience something sort of epic and meaningful, which I really liked. The next criterion is, did the plot move at an appropriate pace? This is where I think the book does stumble a little bit. It is slow burn, and it is ultimately satisfying once you get to the end, but I think there is a little too much time spent in the build-up. I know it's about the character's journey, and people don't change quickly, they don't evolve rapidly, and so you do need to see things kind of slower, but I do think the narrative could have moved at a little faster pace in some parts, because once you get to the final third, it moves at this like breakneck speed, covering a longer stretch of time, and you know, it pulls you along and it's really fantastic. But there's parts earlier on where the character is sort of spinning her wheels, and I think there's ways to portray that other than like focusing so much on kind of their internal obsession of like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. I'm disconnected from everyone. There's mysteries, but I don't have answers, and not really doing anything actively. I think if I reread this again, I think I might find the pacing a little better, because you kind of know what sort of book it is you're reading, and you know what to expect, and so you know to kind of enjoy the ride rather than like just being really anxious for the ending. You know, this isn't like an X-Files, you know, mythology arc kind of thing. It's where, you know, there's mystery and cliffhangers and you never really get answers, but it pulls you along. It's much more about, this is a character study in the midst of kind of a chaotic thing going on outside. So I did think the pacing was a little uneven at times, but that would only really bother like a first-time reader. So it's like, I don't want to tell someone, you know, read this, it's going to be boring, because it's not really boring. It's more just, once you know what to expect, you can manage your expectations and have a better kind of relationship with your reading experience, because it's very much about the journey the character goes on, her internal growth and change, rather than, you know, let's get, you know, the answer to this sort of big sci-fi mystery right away. You do get answers, I will say that. You do get answers. You have to kind of work for it, but you do get answers, and it does pay off. So, you know, pacing issues aside, I do think it does still work. Now, my fourth criterion is, was I still thinking about this after I finished reading? Definitely. This is one, I read the last 100 pages sort of all at once, just at home. I wanted to finish it. And the last 100 pages were very much, it took the story in an unexpected direction that I wasn't expecting, but it did ultimately kind of work. But the journey that you go on through this book, it really asks big questions. There's a bunch of incredible quotes. Next time I read through this, I want to like write down some of these quotes because they're so profound and just mind-blowing, just talking about the way people interact with things, the way people believe in things, you know, the way the world works, just these big sweeping questions. And I think MacInnes is so insightful and just does such a good job of posing these questions in a way that doesn't feel pretentious, because the characters are sort of wrestling with big issues and they kind of come to their own, you know, what if this is the way things are, or, you know, this is what I've observed. And it doesn't feel like the author is sort of beating you over the head with their own big ideas. It really feels like we're going along with the characters and coming to these big realizations along with them, which I really liked. And the fifth criterion is, do I want to read it again? And in that, I will say yes. It's funny. Up until about like the last 20 pages, even like the last 30 pages, I was thinking, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I understand where things are going. I don't know if this is a good enough payoff. And, you know, I'm a little confused. But then like the last like 5 pages are really where you kind of understand where everything's going, and you realize sort of what story the book is telling. And it's not quite the story that you think it is, but it's still very satisfying. It's sort of this like, oh my god ending, and it really builds on itself, and it feels like there's a lot of things that are sort of unimportant, especially the very, very beginning. There's a whole section at the beginning that is cool, but like halfway through the book, I was like, I don't really understand how that first part connected with any of this. But then you get to the end and it all makes sense. So everything does fit together. And so I do want to read this again, because I do want to go into it knowing what I know now and being able to sort of slow down and look at all the details and see how everything fits together, rather than, you know, my initial expectations were that this was going to be kind of a 2001 A Space Odyssey sort of thing. And, you know, in that one, you get sort of, there's 3 different sections, I guess. And each section is sort of a self-contained story, and it reaches sort of a new mystery, like the mystery of the big monoliths. And each section sort of, you know, there's a payoff of a sort. And then when you get to the final section, you know, there is kind of the big grand realization of where this is all going, and it becomes sort of like a first contact story, and then the main character just sort of has this revelation. And this isn't quite that. It does do elements of that, but there's not, like, it's a very slow burn. But it works because, again, like I said, the focus is on the character, not on the big sci-fi story. But the sci-fi story itself is ultimately very satisfying, but it does make you work for it a lot more than maybe other literary sci-fi. Even Contact, which I really love, I think that one has a much better pacing, and so as a result, the payoff at the end, even though it's not a huge massive payoff, it's more a personal one, it still feels like you're kind of progressing. And in this one, you're sort of lost with the character, wandering around, unsure of what's going on, and then ultimately it does come together. So, you know, I do want to read this again. I really did enjoy my time reading it, but I think my expectations were that this was sort of a more fast-paced sci-fi novel rather than a more introspective literary novel. And I like both, and so I did really enjoy it, but go into it kind of knowing that this is a literary novel first, and it's more about enjoying the language, the internal character, world that is set up and explored, and just sort of let the sci-fi story unfold at its own pace and don't rush it. So, I'm kind of repeating myself at this point. So at this point, I will kind of let you go. But I did really enjoy this journey, and I do want to read more of this author's work. So with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.